Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Today's story comes from a man named Murray Kilbride, 68 years old, from Kingston, Ontario. A chef, 41 years on the line, the kind of man who worked doubles through 2 knee surgeries and never once phoned in sick. He'd never been to Asia. He'd never particularly wanted to go. And then, one Sunday afternoon, at his own dinner table, his son and daughter handed him a brochure, and 11 months later he was on a plane with a one-way ticket and no forwarding address. Now, most of the stories on this channel start the same way. A lonely man, a dating app, a woman he's never met asking for money. This one doesn't. There's no fake profile here. Nobody vanished. Nobody blocked his number at 3 in the morning. What happened to Murray was slower than that, and quieter, and in some ways a lot harder to talk about. Because, for a long stretch of it, he was happy. Genuinely happy. Happier than he'd been since his wife died. That's what makes this one stick with you. He wasn't hunted. He walked in with his eyes open, wanting to be useful, and by the time he understood what he'd actually agreed to, the money was spent, and the concrete was poured. We're not going to spoil it, but we'll say this. The moment it turns, it isn't a woman who tells him. It's someone else at that table entirely. Quick note before we get into it. After hearing so many of these stories on this channel, we put together a guide covering what we've learned from them. It's linked in the description if you want it. All right, here's Murray's story, in his own words. The thing people get wrong is they think it was about the home. It wasn't about the home. Napanese, a fine town. The place they picked out was clean. It had a garden. It had a woman at the front desk who called everybody Hon. If I'd been ready, it would have been fine. I wasn't ready. I was 66, and I could still break down a case of chickens in 20 minutes, and I was doing my own eaves. That's the part they never got. Let me back up. I cooked for 41 years, started at 15 washing pots at a steakhouse in Sudbury, moved to Kingston in '79, and the last 19 years I ran the kitchen at a hotel restaurant just off the 401. Not fine dining. Nobody's writing about my beef dip, but I did 400 covers on a Saturday with a brigade of 6, and the plates went out hot, and they went out on time, and if you've never worked a line, you can't know what that's worth to a man. It's not creative. It's not art. It's competence. You do the thing correctly, over and over, and at 11 at night you scrub down and the room's clean, and you know exactly what you accomplished that day. I had my own place for a while in the 90s, a diner on Princess Street. Lasted 22 months. I call that a learning experience because the other words for it upset my wife. Elaine. Married 38 years. She picked our house in '88. Brick, 2-story, awful kitchen, which she thought was hilarious. She got sick in 2018, and I took care of her for 2 years. I won't go into all that. I'll just say I did it. I did it properly. And I did most of it alone. That last part matters later. Turned out I'd been keeping score without knowing it. So, the brochure. There were 3 things they had on me. 1, I went down on the driveway ice in February, and my daughter found out because a neighbor told her. 2, I lost my car keys and had a new fob cut, which apparently is a symptom now. 3, I was in emergency twice. Once for a gash on my forearm from a mandolin, which if anything proves I'd been cooking, and once for chest pain that turned out to be nothing. Reflux. I had a cheeseburger. That's the file. That's the whole file. A fall, a set of keys, and heartburn. My daughter Shannon's a nurse, 26 years at KGH. She's good at her job, and she's the most organized person I've ever met, and I say that as a man who's built a prep list for Christmas dinner for 200. And once Shannon decides something is a pattern, it's a pattern, and you're not arguing her out of it. You're just deciding how loud you want to lose. They drove out and toured the place first, without telling me. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not that they thought it, that they went and looked, and stood in the lobby, and took the pamphlet, and got back in the car, and drove home and ate my roast chicken, and waited until dessert. Wes slid it across the table. My son, 41 years old, works for the city, hasn't made a decision without checking with his sister since 1997. He slid it across and said they wanted to talk about the future, and Shannon started in about how there were stages, and how getting on a list early was the smart move, and how the facility had a whole activity program. Facility? I said, I'm not a piece of equipment. That's it. That's what I said. Flat. The way I'd say the walk-in's warm. And then I got up and did the dishes, because that's what I do when I want the room to end. Should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because once one thing gets said, everything else that's been sitting there comes up out of the floor. Within 20 minutes, we were into Elaine's estate. Money her mother left. Money that had been a sore spot for 4 years. And Shannon said something about how I'd handled it. And I said something about who exactly had shown up on Tuesdays for 2 years, when Elaine couldn't get to the toilet on her own, and who had called from Ottawa to see how things were going. I'd rather not repeat the rest. Wes took her side. He didn't even take it, really. He just sat there and let her have it, which is the same thing but slower. And then nobody called. 14 months. Christmas came and went. I got a card. Signed, not written. My birthday, nothing. And the funny thing about a silence like that is, you stop being able to tell whether you're the one holding it or they are. I'd pick up the phone and think, no, you call me, which is a stupid thing for a grown man to think, and I thought it about 400 times. I sold the house that spring. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't a plan. It started as spite and got dressed up as freedom somewhere along the way. Because I knew, I absolutely knew, that whatever happened next, the two of them had a rough number in their heads for what that house was worth, and they'd already spent it. Not out loud. Nobody says it out loud. But it's there in how people talk about your future. It went for more than I expected. After the realtor and the lawyer and the estate lawyer took their bites, I had $212,000 sitting in a bank on Bath Road, plus my CPP and my OAS, which together run me about $1,900 a month, $212,000, and nobody to leave it to. I didn't want a beach. Everybody assumes I wanted a beach. I'm a redhead from Sudbury. I burn under a fluorescent light. I wanted a job. I booked the ticket on a Tuesday afternoon at the kitchen table in a house that already had somebody else's name on the papers. One way, Toronto to Manila, Manila to Cebu, Cebu to Dumaguete. 11 days before I turned 68. I didn't tell them where I was going. I'm not proud of that. But I didn't. People ask why the Philippines? Like there's supposed to be a reason. There isn't much of one. I'll tell you the actual reason, and you can decide if it's stupid. Her name was Rowena. She washed pots for me for 11 years. Came over in 2007 on some caregiver arrangement that fell apart, ended up in Kingston, ended up in my kitchen, and she was the single hardest worker I have ever employed, and I've employed a lot of people. Never late. Not once in 11 years. She'd come in with a lunch container of rice and some pork thing in a sauce, and she'd eat it standing up at the dish pit at 2 in the afternoon, And one day I asked her what it was, and she gave me a spoonful, and it was better than anything going out my pass. That's how it started. Her mother ran a little eatery in a place called Dumaguete. Rowena had photos on her phone, dented steel trays with adobo and menudo sitting in them, plastic stools, a hand-painted board with the prices on it. 12 pesos for rice. She showed me those photos maybe 4 times over a decade, and I never forgot them. I told her once, we were closing, I was doing the order sheet. I said, one of these days I'll come cook there. Joking, half joking. She laughed and said, CJ, chef. That's it. That's my whole research. That was the extent of my due diligence into a country of 110 million people. I did look at other places. Everybody does. Mexico was the obvious one, and I ruled it out because I don't speak Spanish. And at 67, I wasn't going to learn. Portugal. Everybody's talking about Portugal. But the numbers didn't work, and I don't like being cold and wet, which is the only thing I'd have been leaving behind. Thailand came up on every list I read, and something about it put me off. Couldn't tell you what. Might have been the tone of the men writing about it. The Philippines had 3 things. English everywhere. Real English, signage, government forms, everything. Catholic, which matters more than you'd think when you're my age, and you grew up with a mother who went to St. Anne's twice a week. And the food isn't precious. Nobody there is going to hand me a plate with 3 peas and a smear on it. It's rice, and it's fried, and it's got vinegar in it, and it's meant to be eaten by a person who's been working. I never told Rowena I was going. She'd retired by then, moved to Mississauga to be near her son. I had her number. I looked at it in the airport and put my phone back in my pocket. I don't know why I didn't call. I think I was embarrassed. Like she'd hear it and know it wasn't a holiday. The flight was 31 hours all in. Toronto to Manila, and then Manila to Cebu, and then Cebu to Dumaguete on a propeller plane that felt like a Ford Econoline with wings. I hadn't been on a plane since 2011. I had a bag with my knives in it in the hold, and I spent the entire Pacific crossing convinced somebody was going to steal them. Manila Airport at 4 in the morning. I want to be honest. It broke something in my head a little. The heat comes at you the second the door opens, and it's not heat like a July in Ontario. It's heat like standing in front of a dish machine with the hood open. Wet. It sits on you. And the terminal's this river of people, and everybody's got a taped-up box the size of a bar fridge, these balikbayan boxes, coming home to their families with 150 pounds of Spam and shampoo. And I'm standing there in a windbreaker. A windbreaker? In Manila. Dumaguete, though. Dumaguete's different. It's a university town on Negros, maybe 130,000 people. And there's a seawall boulevard along the water called Rizal Boulevard with old acacia trees hanging over it. And in the evening, the whole town comes out and walks. Families, students from Silliman, old men on the benches, vendors selling green mango with shrimp paste and these little grilled things on sticks. Tricycles going by. That's a motorcycle with a sidecar welded on. And they're everywhere. And they're loud. And there's a diesel and fish smell over everything that I didn't like for about a month, and then couldn't live without. I turned 68 in a pension house 2 streets back from the boulevard. 1,400 pesos a night, about $34 Canadian, with an air conditioner that sounded like a bandsaw. I had a San Miguel Pale Pilsen and a plate of lechon kawali from a place on the corner. Nobody called. Nobody knew to call. And here's the thing I need you to understand, because people always get this bit wrong when I tell it. I wasn't lonely. Or I was. But that wasn't the problem. I'd been lonely since 2020. You get used to lonely. You build a routine around it. I was unemployed. That was the thing eating me. 68 years old with $212,000 in a bank in Kingston, sitting on a plastic chair in the tropics with absolutely nothing I was supposed to be doing at any particular hour of any particular day. You do 41 years of shift work, and then it stops, and there's no shape to the day. None. I'd wake up at 4:15 because that's when I've woken up my entire adult life. And then it's 4:15 in the morning, and there is nothing. The roosters start around then. Everybody warns you about the roosters, and everybody's right. And I'd lie there and think, well, what's the prep list? There was no prep list. I tried the expat thing. There's a strip of bars near the boulevard where you'll find them. Canadians, Americans, a lot of Australians, average age about 70. I went once, sat with 4 of them for 2 hours, drinking Red Horse, which, by the way, will take your legs off if you're not paying attention. And it was 2 hours of women. That's all it was. Every one of them had a story about a woman who'd taken something, and they told these stories like war records. And the youngest guy there had been in the country 9 years and hadn't learned to say thank you in Bisaya. I paid for my beers and walked home along the seawall, and I thought, if I end up at that table, I've genuinely wasted the trip. So mostly I ate. That was my activity. I ate my way up and down that town like it was a job, and I'll tell you the truth, most of it was fine. Fine's the word. Assembled. Somebody heated something and put it beside rice, except one place, little eatery on the boulevard end, open front, 6 tables, a steam counter with the trays in it. I went in because it was raining. Had the sinigang na baboy, that's a sour pork soup, the marind base, and it is not a subtle thing. And I sat there with my spoon and I thought, somebody in this kitchen is actually tasting the food. I went back the next day, and the next, 11 days running. Same corner table, same order half the time. On the 12th day, the woman who ran it came out to clear my plate, and I said, and I want to be clear, I did not plan this. This is just what 41 years does to a man. I said, your sinigang's undersoured. You're pulling the tamarind too early. She stopped, plate in her hand, looked at me for about 4 seconds. Then she said, so prove it. Next morning I was there at 5, wearing a pair of borrowed rubber slippers 2 sizes too small, standing in a kitchen the size of my old walk-in, with a woman I'd exchanged maybe 40 words with, handing me an apron. I hadn't tied an apron in 3 years. My hands remembered how before I did. Her name is Marilu Batak, 44 years old at the time, which made her 24 years younger than me, and I want to head something off right now, because I know what you're thinking. It wasn't that. Not for a long while it wasn't that. For the first while, I don't think she registered me as a man at all. I was a large red foreigner who kept turning up and telling her about tamarind. She was widowed. Husband died in 2016, some kind of heart thing at 41, and she'd been running that eatery on her own ever since. Eldest of 6. Her mother's out in Sibyllin, which is maybe 15 minutes up the coast, and there's a brother and a sister and various kids attached to all of it, and every peso that eatery made went somewhere before it got to her. First morning I was there at 5. She was already there. That's the detail I'd like on my headstone about her. I showed up at 5 thinking I was being impressive, and she'd been in for 20 minutes. The kitchen was about 11 feet by 6, 2 burners on a gas ring, 1 deep fryer that had come out of somewhere in about 1998, a rice cooker the size of a garbage can, and a chest freezer that you had to hit on the top left corner to make it cycle properly. That's it. That's the whole plant. She was feeding maybe 140 people a day out of that. I fixed the sinigang first, because that's what I'd opened my mouth about. She was boiling the tamarind mix in at the start with the pork, so by service it had gone flat and sweet. Told her to hold it back. Add it in the last 15, taste it at the pass. She did it. Tried it. Didn't say anything to me. But the next day, she did it again. And the day after that. And about 2 weeks in, I heard her tell her helper to hold the tamarind. And I stood there over the fryer basket, like a man who'd just been given a medal. Then, the fryer. The oil temp was all over the place, because nobody was managing the recovery. She'd drop a full basket of lumpia into cold oil and wonder why they came out greasy. I made her a chart, an actual chart, in pen, taped to the wall. Small batches, let it come back up, wipe the seal on the freezer, rotate the trays. Rice timing. Ordering. She was buying pork 3 times a week from a stall at the public market and paying whatever they said. I got her onto twice a week and a proper count. You have to understand what this was for me. I hadn't been useful in 3 years, not one single day. And here's this woman letting me stand in her kitchen at 5 in the morning correcting her fryer temperatures. And she never once said what everybody at home would have said, which is, "Dad, sit down." I did that free. First month, second month. Never came up. I'd have paid her for the privilege, honestly. And about 6 weeks in, I basically tried to. The burner was the first time. Her second ring was dying. The flame was orange on one side, and you couldn't get a wok hot on it. And I said I'd pick one up. There may be 4,500. That's 110 Canadian. It's nothing. She said no. I said it's a burner, Marilou. She said no again, in that flat way, and went back to what she was doing. Now, I'd read the forums. Before I came, I read a lot of them. More than was good for me. And every single story on there starts the same. 3 days in, and there's a number to send money to. Gcash, Western Union, some sister with a hospital bill. That's the shape of the thing. That's what you brace for. And I'm 8 weeks in with a woman who won't let me buy a burner. I brought it up again, a month later. That time, she got properly annoyed with me. Told me I could work in her kitchen as long as I liked, but I wasn't going to buy things. And then she said the line I still think about. She said, "I'm not going to be some man's project." Which, look, she'd seen it. Dumaguete's full of it. There's a certain kind of foreigner in that town who arrives with a wallet and a plan for somebody's life. And she'd been watching them come and go on that boulevard for 20 years. 8 months. 8 months I was in and out of that kitchen, and she did not take 1 peso off me. I want that on the record before anybody starts, because when I tell people how this ended, they all say, "Oh, here we go." And no, not here we go. That's not what this was. What she did take was time. She started keeping me back after we closed the counter down, and we'd sit on the plastic stools out front, with a San Miguel each, and she'd do her books in a school exercise notebook. Actual pencil, actual notebook, columns she'd ruled herself. And I'd watch her do it and think, well, there's the problem. But I kept my mouth shut about that one for a while. She told me about her family in pieces. Her mother, Nane Purificacion, 79, diabetic, lives in the family place in Sibulan, on land that's been theirs since her grandfather. Her brother, Ricky, who drank and who she talked about carefully. A younger sister, baby, 3 kids. A nephew, Jomar, who was in nursing school in Dumaguete, and who she was quietly paying for. That's the thing I understood way too late. She wasn't a woman running a small business. She was a woman running a small business that 11 people ate out of. In this country, if you're the eldest daughter, that's not a burden. It's a job title. Nobody votes on it. Nobody thanks you for it either. Month 6 or 7, she took me to Sibulan. We went on a jeepney, one of those old converted things. Benches down both sides, 12 pesos, everybody's knees touching, a rosary and a picture of the Santo Niño hanging off the mirror, and a speaker behind my head playing Air Supply at a volume 1 would describe as hostile. 40 minutes of that, and the road along the water, and the fish drying on racks, and every 100 yards a basketball court with a bent rim. The house was concrete block, half finished the way half of them are out there, corrugated roof, an outdoor kitchen under a lean-to, chickens under the house. Her mother sat in a plastic chair and looked at me for a good long while, and then said something in Bisaya that made everybody laugh, and Marilu wouldn't translate it, and I still don't know what it was. They fed me, obviously, grilled bangus and rice and this vinegar with chilies in it, and I ate 4 times what I meant to, because refusing food out there is basically an insult. There were kids everywhere, babies 3, plus neighbors, plus some cousins, and by the end of the afternoon they'd all landed on Tito Murray. Tito, uncle. That's just what you get called out there when you're old and around. It doesn't mean anything. It meant something to me. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. On the jeepney home, she took my hand. First time, 8 months in, and she wouldn't do it until I'd sat in her mother's yard and eaten her mother's fish. Try squaring that with a scam. I couldn't. I still can't. Entirely. Month 10, I finally wore her down. Not on the burner. On all of it. New fryer, 2 proper high-output rings, and a chest chiller that actually held temperature. I priced it out at a supplier in Dumaguete, and it came to $180,000, about 4,400 Canadian. I made the argument as a business argument because I knew that was the only one she'd take. Told her the equipment would let her run a lunch service, and lunch was where the money was, and that this wasn't a gift to her, it was an investment in the operation, and I'd take it out of the till over time. She said yes on a Thursday. It went in her name. Everything did. Everything has to. I couldn't own a business there any more than I could own a square foot of that country. I knew that. I'd read it. There was no contract, no paper, no receipt with my name on it, nothing. I never even asked for one. That's not something she did to me. That's something I did. The equipment landed on a Tuesday, and I want to tell you it was the best day I'd had in 5 years. And I know how that sounds. A fryer. A man gets choked up over a fryer. But it was a good fryer. 20-liter. Proper thermostat. Actual recovery. And 2 high-output rings that would get a wok screaming, and a chest chiller that held at 4 degrees instead of whatever the old one was doing, which was mostly interpretive. We opened lunch 6 weeks later. That was my idea, and I pushed for it hard, because breakfast and merienda's fine, but lunch is where you make your money in that town. Office people from the Silliman side, tricycle drivers, students, and everybody eats at 11:30, because in the Philippines, everybody eats at 11:30. We did a rotating 3 viand board and a proper pancit on Fridays, and I put a hand-painted sign out front that Marilu's helper's cousin did for 400 pesos. Takings went from about $9,000 a day to somewhere north of P15,000. On a good one, that's roughly $216 to $360 Canadian. Doesn't sound like anything, does it? Out there, it's a different business entirely. I was, and I'll own this, insufferably proud of that. 41 years of cooking, and the thing I'm proudest of is a lunch counter with 6 tables on Rizal Boulevard. Around then, I got out of the pension house. Found a place 2 streets back, 2nd floor, 1 bedroom, tiled, an aircon in the bedroom that worked, and a ceiling fan in the front room that didn't. $12,000 a month, about $290. Landlady kept a rooster in the yard that started at 4 and finished at about 4:40, and then had another go at 5:15, just to be thorough. Marilou didn't move in. Not officially, not for a long time. She had her own place above the eatery, and there's a whole thing out there about what the neighbors see. And she was a widow in a Catholic town of 130,000 people, where everybody knows everybody's business. But she was there most nights. We were, in every way that mattered, together. I just never had a word for it that I'd have been comfortable saying out loud. Then the family came in. That's the bit I'd tell somebody to watch for, if they asked me, and nobody's asked me. It doesn't happen with an announcement. There's no ceremony. It just, one Sunday, you're a guest in Sibyllin, and about 4 Sundays later, nobody's setting a place for you, because your place is already there. Sundays became fixed. Jeepney out after we closed the counter, or later a habal if we were running behind, which at my age on the back of a motorbike on that coast road was an act of genuine optimism. Nanay purificación in her chair. Baby's kids. Cousins whose exact relationship to anybody I never did work out and stopped asking about. Rice, always. Whatever fish came in that morning. Somebody's karaoke machine 2 houses over doing my way at a volume that could strip paint. They called me Tito. All of them. Right down to the ones who'd only just learned to talk. Tito Murray. And there was a fiesta in Sibyllin in, I want to say, May. Whole barangay out. Lechon on a bamboo pole. A basketball tournament on the court by the chapel that went on for 2 days. A mass at 7 in the morning that I stood through in a barong shirt Marilou bought me because I didn't own one. I ate more that weekend than I had in my life, and I've worked in kitchens. At some point during that fiesta, a cousin of Marilou's asked if I'd stand as ninong for her baby at the baptism in July. I said yes. Of course, I said yes. Somebody asks a 68-year-old man with no grandchildren to be a godfather, and you think it's a compliment. And it is a compliment. That part's real. What I didn't know is that out there, ninong isn't a role you play for 40 minutes in a church. It's a lifelong financial relationship. You're expected at birthdays with an envelope. You're expected at graduations with an envelope. School shoes, first communion, the lot. And by the time I understood that I was ninong to 3 of them, I'm not complaining about it. I want to be clear. It cost me maybe $4,000 a month total, $100. It wasn't the money. It's just that nobody says the terms out loud and you're agreeing to something anyway. The one I volunteered for was Jomar, Marilou's nephew, baby's eldest, 22, doing nursing at a college in Dumaguete, and about to hit the board exam. Quiet kid. He'd come by the eatery to eat for free, the way all of them did, and he'd sit in the corner with his phone propped on a napkin dispenser, watching review lectures with one earbud in. And I asked Marilou one night how he was going to pay for the board review course, because they all do a review course out there. It's basically compulsory. And she did this thing with her mouth and said they were sorting it. Sorting it meant she was paying it. Out of the eatery. Out of the eatery I'd just spent $4,400 re-equipping. So I said I'd take it. Review course and his last semester's tuition. $95,000 all in, which is about $2,300 Canadian. She didn't ask me for that. I want that stated plainly, because it matters to me. I put it on the table, and she went quiet for a bit and said, "Murray, you don't have to do all this." I said something like, I know I don't, which I thought was the end of it. I think about that sentence a lot now. You don't have to do all this. At the time I heard it as her being humble. There's another way to hear it. She might have been telling me something. Anyway, Jamar passed the boards on the first sitting. Whole family went to the results. I've still got a photo of him in the white uniform on my phone, and I'll be honest with you, I've looked at that photo more than I've looked at photos of my own kids in the last 3 years. Here's the part one didn't clock at the time. The asking moved. Not from Marilou, from around her. It had come through baby, or through a cousin, or it'd get raised at a birthday party, where you can't say no because there are 40 people there and a cake. Baby got me at one of those, one of her kids' birthdays, sometime after Christmas, and asked me, very casual, holding a paper plate, whether I knew what they charge at Silliman Medical Center for an overnight admission. I didn't know. She told me. Then she changed the subject. Nothing was asked. Nothing was ever asked in that conversation. I just came away carrying a number. The other thing that stopped was the notebook. Marilou used to do her books on the stool out front with a beer while I sat there, ruled columns, pencil, and I could see the whole operation. Somewhere in there she started doing them upstairs after I'd gone. When I mentioned it, she said it was easier with the light. And the monthly figure, I never decided on it. That's the thing that gets me. There was no conversation where I sat down and agreed to a number. It just accreted. Rice for Sibyllin, Nene's diabetes meds from Mercury Drug, 1 kid's tuition, a load of cement when the roof went, my share of the eatery's slow weeks. And when I finally sat down with my bank statements one night and added the whole thing up, it was running about $45,000 a month. Just over $1,000 on CPP and OAS of 1,900 Canadian, which means every month I was pulling the difference out of the house money. And I looked at that number and I thought, that's what a family costs. I paid staff for 19 years. I know what people cost. That's what I told myself. That's the exact rationalization, word for word. Ricky went down on the baking road on a Wednesday night in September. I want to say up front that I liked Ricky. He drank. Everybody knew he drank. And he was also the only one in that family who'd ever ask me a question about myself. He'd sit at the end of the counter with a red horse and ask about Canada. What's snow actually like? How much does a house cost? Do you have to shovel it, or does the government do it? Nobody else ever asked me anything. He was on a Honda XRM going home in the rain, and something happened with a dog or a truck, depending which cousin's telling it, and he ended up in the ditch with a compound fracture of the left tibia and a hip that was in pieces. You want to know what a Philippine medical emergency actually looks like? It looks like a woman on a plastic stool at 11 at night, with her phone in both hands, and everybody in the building awake, and somebody saying the word deposit. That's the thing they don't tell you at home. You don't get treated and then billed. The private hospital wants money before they'll do the surgery. There's PhilHealth, and PhilHealth covers a slice, and the slice is not the pie. So you're standing at a cashier's window at midnight, arranging what your brother-in-law's leg is worth. Marilou didn't ask me. I want that in the record, too, for whatever it's worth by now. She was on the phone trying to get P60,000 out of a lending place at what I later found out was 5% a month, and I put my hand over her phone and said, don't. First payment was $78,000, about 1,900 Canadian, surgery deposit, and the plates. Then it kept going, because that's how it goes. Post-op infection, 6 extra days in, another P40,000, then the transfer out and the follow-ups, then the second procedure in December because the hip wasn't setting, then physio, then the medications, and the medications out there you buy yourself from Mercury Drug on a list, you don't get them handed to you. I paid it in increments over 4 months. Sometimes cash, mostly Gcash because everybody out there runs on Gcash. You tap a number on your phone and the money's gone in 9 seconds, which is a design feature I've come to think about a fair bit. Total was P310,000, about 7,600 Canadian dollars. I didn't ask for a single receipt, not one. 4 months of paying hospital bills for a man in another building, and I never once said, "Can I see the statement?" Would you have? I'd like to think somebody would. But you're standing in a corridor at Silliman Medical, with the aircon dripping into a bucket and a family sitting on the floor because there aren't enough chairs, and a woman in a mask is telling you the number, and you don't say, "Hang on, let me audit that." You just don't. And here's the honest part. One wasn't being scammed there. Not in the way you're thinking. That man's leg was genuinely broken. I saw the X-ray. I saw him in that bed with the pins in. That's why I stopped counting. Then the house. It started as an extension. That's how it always starts. Nanay Purificacion's place in Cebulan had 2 proper rooms and a lean-to kitchen, and there were, depending on the week, between 6 and 9 people sleeping in it. The roof was corrugated over half of it, and tarp over the rest. Rainy season, she'd have a bucket in the front room. Marilou mentioned, one night on the stools out front, that they'd been talking about adding a room at the back. I said, "What would that cost?" She said, "Maybe 200,000. And then I did the thing that ruined me, and it wasn't a woman doing it, and it wasn't a con. I said, "If you're going to do that, don't do that. Do it properly. Concrete, 2-story, real roof, real bathroom." Because I'd walked into that place 40 Sundays running and watched a 79-year-old diabetic woman go out to a lean-to boil water. And I'm a man who spent 19 years redesigning kitchens. Nobody asked me for a house. I proposed the house. P2.1 million. 51,000 Canadian dollars. Now, I knew the law. I want to be clear about that because people always assume these stories are about a fella who didn't know. I knew. Foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines. It's in the Constitution. It's not a technicality. It's not something a lawyer gets around for you. I could have bought a condo. Foreigners can own condo units up to 40% of a building. But you can't own a square meter of dirt, and you can't get around it by putting a corporation together. Or you can, and it collapses, and there's a whole graveyard of men on those forums who tried. And it was worse than the normal version, because that land in Cebulan isn't even titled. It's family land. Been theirs since her grandfather cleared it. Tax declarations only. No Torrens title. The way an enormous amount of provincial land in that country still is. So it isn't Marilou's either, exactly. It's the family's. It's Nani's until it isn't, and then it's a conversation between 6 siblings. I put $51,000 into a building I could not own, on ground that nobody in that family could produce a piece of paper for. Ask me why. I'm 69 at that point. I've got no one to leave money to. My daughter is in Kingston with a brochure in a drawer, and my son does what she says, and the last conversation I had with either of them was about who deserved what. Now here's a house full of people calling me Tito, and a woman who wouldn't take money off me for 8 months, and an old lady with a bucket in her front room. I'd rather have a building with those people in it than a number in a bank on Bath Road that my children are counting. That's not a good reason. That's a reason. We broke ground in February, and I'll tell you, the first stretch of it was the best time I had out there. Me and a hollow block crew and Marilou's cousin Bebot as the foreman, And I was out there at 7 in the morning with a bag of pain de sal for the boys, checking that the rebar was tied. Bebot was hired because Bebot was family. I didn't pick him. I found out he was foreman the day he turned up as foreman. The first crack was the money. P2.1 million became P2.4, then P2.7. Materials always needed rebuying. Cement went missing, and I mean physically went missing, twice. Sand deliveries that got paid for and arrived at half volume. Every single time there was an explanation, and every single explanation was reasonable, and the running total kept climbing about 40% past where we started. Second crack was smaller and worse. Marilou stopped translating. For 2 years, if the conversation went into Bisaya at a table I was sitting at, she'd lean over at some point and give me the gist. Not word for word, just, they're talking about the fiesta. Baby's landlord's being difficult, whatever. That stopped. It stopped somewhere around the 3rd month of the build, and I noticed it the way you notice a fridge that stopped humming. Something's off in the room and it takes you a minute. And then there was an afternoon at Nane's. Pouring rain on the tarp, everybody inside, 4 or 5 of them going back and forth. And in the middle of it, I heard my own name. Murray. Not addressed to me. In a sentence. And then 2 more sentences. And then Bebot laughed. And then somebody saw me looking. And the whole thing stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Like a switch. Then Baby got up and asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. I drank the coffee. I didn't ask what they were saying. I've thought about that afternoon more than any other single hour of the 3 years. I had it right there. All I had to do was open my mouth in that room the way I'd have opened it at anybody who was mishandling a station in my kitchen. I've fired men on the spot for less than that silence, and I sat there and drank the coffee, because I did not want to know. The house got its roof in June. Not finished. No glass in the windows. No doors hung. Bare block on the inside. The stairs poured, but no railing. But roofed. And in that country, a roofed structure is a real thing. It's a thing people can point at. That's when the argument started about who was moving into it. Baby had it worked out. Ground floor for her and the 3 kids, because her landlord in Dumaguete had put the rent up, and because the kids' school in Sibulan was closer anyway. Nanay upstairs. That was the plan, and she said it like it had been the plan the whole time, at a table, with about 9 people there. Marilou pushed back. Sharp, too. Sharper than I'd ever heard her. And it went into Bisaya inside about 15 seconds, and stayed there for 20 minutes. Nobody asked me anything. I paid for that building. Every block of it. Every bag of cement. Every peso of the 400,000. It went over. And there was a full-scale family argument about the occupancy of it, and nobody at that table thought to turn their head and ask the man who bought it what he thought. That's not a complaint about money. I need you to understand that. It's that I'd have said the same thing Marilou was saying. If somebody had asked me, I'd have agreed with her. I just wasn't in the room, in the sense that matters. Ricky came to the eatery about a week after that. On his own, middle of the afternoon, dead hour between lunch and merienda. Walking with a cane and doing it badly, that hip never did come right. He was sober. 8 months by then. That's the other thing about Ricky. The accident put him off it, which is a hell of a way to get there, but it took. He asked for coffee, 3-in-1, the sachet stuff, which is what everybody drinks out there and which I never learned to like. Sat at the end of the counter where he always sat. And he said, "Tito, I need to tell you something." He told me the accident money didn't all go to the accident. The surgery was real. The plates were real. The infection was real. The second procedure in December was real. And, by his reckoning, about 3 months of what I paid went to Silliman Medical and the pharmacy and the physio. The rest didn't. It went to the household. It went to a debt baby had with a lending outfit that was eating her alive at $5 a month. It went to rice and school fees and a tricycle repair and the electric bill and Nane's meds, and some of it just went in the way money does when there isn't enough of it, and it's nobody's fault in particular. 8 months of transfers with the word hospital on them. I didn't say anything. He kept going, because he'd clearly practiced it, and he wanted it out. He said the family had a name for me. Ang Pondo. The fund. He said it wasn't meant cruel. He said it the way you'd say a nickname. Everybody uses it. It's affectionate, Tito. It's not... And he ran out of words in English and just did that thing with his hand. Affectionate. I've thought about that word more than any other word from those 3 years. If they'd been laughing at me, I'd have known what to do with it. If it had been contempt, I could have picked that up and carried it out the door. But it wasn't contempt. That's what took the legs out from under me. In their heads, I genuinely was one of the good things that had happened to that family, and I was also a category of thing rather than a person, and both of those were true in the same sentence. I asked him why he was telling me. He said, because he's the one who got the surgery. Utang na loob. That's the phrase, and every article you'll ever read explains it as debt of gratitude, which is accurate and useless. What it actually is that Ricky could not sit at that counter and drink my coffee with that in his mouth. It had to come out. He was in a fight with his sisters over the house at the time, and I'm not naive enough to think that had nothing to do with it. Both things were going on, but he came, and nobody made him. I thanked him. I remember that. I thanked him, and I told him to get his hip looked at again, because he was walking wrong and he was going to wreck his knee. Then I did the pans. That's what I did, 2 hours to service. I broke down the chiller. I did the pans. I did the order sheet for the next day. I ran lunch, and I said nothing to anybody. Because in a kitchen you finish the shift. You can fall apart at 11 o'clock. Not at 4. I told her that night, upstairs, after we'd shut. I didn't shout. I've never shouted at a woman in my life, and I wasn't going to start at 69. I just told her what Ricky had said and asked her if it was true. She didn't deny it. Not 1 second of denial. Not one attempt at a story. She sat down on the edge of the bed, and she cried. Properly. The kind where you can't get the words out. And I stood there by the window with the karaoke going somewhere down the street. Somebody doing my way. They were always doing my way. And I let her cry, because I couldn't think what else to do. And when she could talk, she said the thing that I'd take back, if I could take back one thing I've been told. She said she loved me. Then she said she would have taken the money anyway. She said, and I'm giving you the sense of it, not the words, because the words were half in Bisaya and half broken. She said that she was the eldest, and her mother was 79, and baby was drowning, and Jomar had 1 chance at those boards, and Ricky's leg was in pieces, and that I had $200,000 and no one on this earth to give it to, and that in her whole life she had never once had the luxury of separating those 2 facts from each other. She said it like a woman explaining arithmetic. Not defiant. Just tired. I asked her, and this is the stupidest question I've ever asked anybody, and I knew it while it was leaving my mouth. I asked her whether she'd have loved me if I'd had nothing. She looked at me for a long time, and she said, Murray, if you had nothing, you would not have come here. She wouldn't answer it. She refused to answer it. And every time I go back over that night, that's the moment I stop at. Not the money, not the fund, That. Because she was right, wasn't she? A broke 68-year-old cook doesn't sell a house and fly to Negros. He stays in Kingston and takes the room in Napanee and eats his dinner at 5:30 with the television on. I wanted a villain that night. I really did. I'd have paid for one. Somebody with a fake profile and a second boyfriend in Norway and a laugh at my expense, so I could put my coat on and be the wronged party and fly home hard done by. What I got was a woman crying on a bed who'd never lied about anything except the destination of hospital money, and a family that fed me every Sunday for 2 years, and a building I can't own on ground nobody can prove they own, and my own name in a language I never bothered to learn. 2 years. $72,000, near enough, before the overruns. And not one person in this story did a single thing to me that I didn't hand them. 3 months on, and here's where things actually stand. No drama in it. I'll just give you the numbers because numbers are the only part of this one can hand you clean. I stopped the monthly, P45,000 down to 0, in one go, on a Sunday. I didn't announce it. I didn't call a meeting. I'm not built for speeches. I just stopped. And I told Mary Lou I'd stopped. And I said, if there's an actual emergency, an actual one, a hospital with a person in it, she can come to me, and I'll listen. Everything else is theirs to work out the way it was theirs to work out before I got off a plane. What happened next was not what I'd braced for. Nobody screamed. Nobody turned up at my door. It went quiet, the way things go quiet out there. Baby doesn't speak to me now, doesn't cut me either, exactly. She says, "Good morning," if we pass on the boulevard, in that flat, polite way. A couple of the cousins stopped coming by the counter. 2 of the 3 baptism families still bring the kids around, and I still put an envelope in a hand at a birthday, because I said I would, and I'm not going to be the man who took that back. Ricky still comes. Every week. Still asks about snow. Marilou stayed. I don't know what that proves. I wanted to prove something. Some nights I'm sure it does, and other nights I think, well, she's got a business with my friar in it, and that's a reason to stay too. She's here 4 nights out of 7. We eat. We do the order sheet. I still work that line, and I still hold the tamarind back till the last 15 minutes. Where I sit financially, I finally sat down with the statements. All of it. 3 years. The equipment and the tuition and the hospital and the house and the overruns and the monthly, and it came to just over 88,000 Canadian dollars. There's about 124,000 left, which, and I want to be fair to myself for one sentence, is not nothing. I'm not a ruined man. There are fellas on that boulevard with $40 and a visa problem. I've got 124,000, a pension of $1,900 a month that lands whether I get out of bed or not. And I'm on tourist extensions like everybody else, going out to Cebu when I need to. I never did the SRRV. Would have had to park 10 to 50,000 US in a Philippine bank, and I couldn't stomach a third party holding my money after everything else. What I own out of all of it? Nothing. Half a business that's legally entirely hers. A 2-story house in Sibilin on land nobody in that family can produce a title for, that I paid every peso of, that I have no more legal claim to than the man who delivered the sand. Babies on the ground floor, Nane's upstairs with a bathroom that works, and no bucket in the front room. I'd do the bathroom again. Just so you know. Out of the whole 88,000, that's the piece I'd sign for twice. Now, you've sat through all this, so let me give you the useful part. Because we've had 3 months to work out what I'd actually tell a man in a pension house on Rizal Boulevard eating his 11th dinner alone. First one's boring, and it's the only one that matters. Decide your number before you land. Write it down, not in your head, on paper, in a drawer. This much a month, this much total, and that's the whole of it. And then here's the hard half. Don't let anybody move that number, and the anybody includes you. Nobody moved my number. There was no number. That's the entire story. I never sat down once in 3 years and made a decision about money. It just happened at me in increments, every one of which I defend to you right now individually, and which add up to $88,000. Second, if you're going to give it, call it a gift and give it. Don't call it an investment, and don't call it a loan, and don't tell yourself you'll take it out of the till, because you won't, and the lie's not for them. It's for you. What I paid was gifts. Every peso. I just wanted the word investment so I could keep thinking of myself as a businessman instead of a lonely man buying a chair at somebody's table. Third, learn the language. Any of it. I was there 3 years, and I've got maybe 40 words of Bisaya. And I sat in a room and heard my own name go past me in a sentence I couldn't follow. And I drank the coffee instead of asking. Every man in this position gets that afternoon. What you do in it is the whole thing. And the last one, which isn't advice, it's just what I know now. Being needed is not the same as being loved. But, and this is the part the bitter fellas at that bar never get to, it's not the opposite of it either. Both things were in that house. She meant it when she said she loved me, and she meant it when she said she'd have taken the money anyway. And out there, those two sentences live in the same room without arguing. In Kingston, we think love's the thing that's left over after you subtract the practical. Out there, there's no leftover. There never was. Her mother's diabetic, her sister's drowning, and a man arrives who can fix it. You can call that calculation if you like, but she was up at 4:40 every morning of her life for 11 people before I ever walked in that door. Here's the joke, and I'd like to be the one to tell it before somebody else does. I ran from a family that wanted to manage my money and my decline, and I spent 3 years and $88,000 buying a family that managed my money and called me Tito while they did it. Same shape. Warmer weather. I haven't called Kingston. I've got the number. I've had the number the whole time. Shannon's a good nurse, and she was probably half right about the driveway. And Wes never had a bad thought in his life. He just had a sister. I'll call. I keep saying that. I've been saying it for 3 years. Maybe when the counter's slow. That was Murray Kilbride, still in Dumaguete, still on the line 5 mornings a week. We wanted to end the week with this one because it doesn't fit the shape most of these stories take, and that's exactly why it's worth your time. There was no fake profile, no second boyfriend, no woman who vanished. There was a lonely, capable man who could not tolerate being useless, and a family that genuinely needed help, and a cultural expectation that neither side ever said out loud because neither side knew it needed saying. He wasn't robbed. He was absorbed. And the difference between those two words is worth about $88,000. If there's one thing to carry out of it, it's Murray's own. Set the number before you land, write it down, and treat every peso after that as a gift you're choosing to give. Because that's what it is, whatever you call it at the time. Stories like Murray's are why we put that guide together. Everything we've learned from the men who've sat down and told us what went wrong, all in one place. It's in the description if it's something you need. Thanks for spending this time with us. Look after yourselves out there. We'll see you next time on Inside the Philippines.